Another lovely day in Redcliffe. You've probably all heard the famous poem, Footprints in the Sand. A lady dreams of her life as footprints in the sand, where God walks along with her. But she noticed that at the hardest moments of life, there was only one set of footprints. This troubled her, and she said to God in her dream, "God, when I needed you most, why did you leave me?" God says to her, "My child, at those dark times, when life was at its hardest, there is only one set of footprints, because that was when I carried you." Today's story is a lot like that. Of course, in today's world, I read one meme where God says, "When there was only one set of footprints, I was social distancing." Today's story is a bit like that. Two disciples take a quick journey on a road to Emmaus to get away from Jerusalem. We're never told the names of the disciples. There's a chance that they're a husband and wife trying to get away from Jerusalem, where everything's a bit hot and tense. They're trying to get out of there. Not sure what Bible that guy was reading. One of the disciples was named Cleopas, and we read in John 19:25 that Cleopas's wife was at the foot of the cross. Cleopas and his wife getting out of town? Although part of them wanted to run away, get away from the pain of the last few days, when a complete stranger walks up to them, from the overflow of the heart the mouth speaks. They can't help but blab about Jesus as they walk along the road. You know what that's like. There's a topic burning in your heart, and you can't think or talk about anything else. When coronavirus first hit, I couldn't read a book for 2 weeks. My mind was racing with all the things I had to do to keep the church going. I couldn't concentrate. Some of you will relate to that. Their spirit is still with Jesus, but their flesh is weak. It wants to run away. These disciples are going through grief. They stood with their faces downcast. We thought, we hoped, but he was killed. What Jesus facilitates along that walk is really healthy and helpful. He gets them to talk it out. When I first started doing funerals, I noticed at the end people hung around in awkward silence. No one knew what to say or do. So I began telling people to tell stories. Tell the loved ones stories till they make you laugh and make you cry. Talk it out. We know when we talk something out, we talk it out. We talk it through. If you talk it out, you're much less likely to act it out. Who are you talking to in this time of crisis? Who are you listening to? Are you going for that walk and talk? Then Jesus seems a bit mean in the reading. Don't you guys get it? But he's helping them find meaning. He gives them what must have been the most amazing biblical lesson of history. They were absolutely lost, and Jesus helps them find their way. I've been with people like that. Why did my daughter die? Why did I lose my job? Why is my business going bankrupt? After we experienced the edge of a cyclone in Ayr, I went out the next day trying to help. That's the trees on the road in front of the church. But I soon found myself feeling quite useless. There's only so much you can do with a pair of secateurs. If you don't have a chainsaw or a mulcher, get out of the way. I was feeling useless until I wrote my sermon. What I discovered was that you certainly need the men and women of council and the army to do the cleanup. You need the electricians and the linesmen. But someone has to make meaning of the mess. As the pastor, I was the meaning maker. People needed that too. We know if we have meaning, we can put up with much suffering. We will suffer for a purpose. Train till it hurts to win the gold. Work long hours to make a difference in someone's life. Meaning makes sense of suffering. That's what Jesus is doing with these disciples. Meaninglessness is existential torture. So many of the tragedies I've ministered to, suicides, infant deaths, accidents, it's the meaninglessness that does our hearts in. Meaning is a conundrum to those who don't believe in God, like suffering is a problem for those who do. If we are just randomly arranged atoms in a material world, meaning is inexplicable. Where does it come from? I read a book recently by an evolutionary biologist, an atheist. In his world, meaning is just a strange mutation of evolution that persists because it happens to be useful. It gives us an advantage. The argument is a little ironic because it explains how meaning can exist in a meaningless universe by appealing to meaning. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I'm satisfied. Meaning satisfies. The universe isn't matter, it's what matters. Then Jesus, the stranger, goes through the Old Testament and explains how the Messiah must suffer and die and rise again. And what they thought was wrong was right. What a powerful passage. And people have thought the Old Testament must be full of prophecies, verses and predictions about the suffering Messiah, dying and rising again. And they've gone through the Old Testament and looked and found only half a dozen verses. Isaiah 53, Psalm 22. The skeptics point to this and say, where's the evidence? Show me chapter and verse. But here's the thing. There weren't chapter and verses in the Bible in those days. They didn't look for proof texts. They looked for stories. It's a forest and trees problem. There's not a lot of verses, but when you step back, the stories are everywhere. The seed of Adam who would stomp the snake but be pierced on the heel. Abraham going to sacrifice his firstborn son Isaac when God's ram gift takes Isaac's place. Joseph sold for 30 pieces of silver, assumed dead, appears alive before his brothers. You meant it for evil, but God used it for good, to redeem the world. The Lord passing over the firstborn for the blood of a spotless lamb. The Day of Atonement, the scapegoat, the cities of refuge, the Jubilee, Israel's exile and return. Jonah, 3 days and nights in the belly of death, regurgitated with a message of grace. Over and over again, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood in the story of his working with his people. The self-sacrifice, the death and resurrection, forgiveness, grace and mercy for impending judgment. It makes sense now. Of course. But could it be true? Could it really be true? Jesus must rise? Their hearts are burning within them when they get to their destination. But they don't want this night to end. Stay with us, stranger. It's nearly nightfall. Have you had a night like that? 29 years ago, Becky and I were at NCYC, the National Christian Youth Convention. The speaker, Tony Campolo, had preached up a storm, and Becky and I wandered around the campus and talked about our faith, our God, our hopes and dreams. It was a cold night, but we felt strangely warm. It was on the eve of the Gulf War, but we felt a deep peace. We talked for hours, but it felt like minutes. We didn't want that night to end. We fell in love that night. It was so centered around God. Maybe that's what's helped us reach 25 years this week. So they sit down for dinner, and the guest, he does the honours. He takes some bread, he gives thanks, and he breaks it and gives it to them. Oh, this is the final piece of the puzzle. That meal. He told us this would happen. He knew. And suddenly they recognize who he is, and he disappears. They probably took 4 hours to walk the 11 kilometres to Emmaus. I imagine it took them an hour to run back. Their fears and doubts had made them want to run away. Now they run too. It is true. The Lord has risen and appeared to Simon and to us also along the road. They have meaning. They can navigate any suffering. How is your walk? In this time of fear and uncertainty, we are tempted to run away. We can certainly feel like God is distant. I want to encourage you. Now is the time God might be carrying you. But I'll go back to what I said at the start. Are you social distancing from God? It can be tempting or easy. Fill our lives with Netflix, Bible study isn't on anymore. Church is more a spectator sport than a participation event. We can think, I'll hibernate for the winter. But we're not hibernating animals. Now could be a time to go deeper than you've ever gone before. To look into the scriptures in a way you haven't before, just like these two disciples were able to. There's lots of online studies you can join from around the world. Maybe it's reading a whole gospel for the first time in one day. Maybe it's journaling piece by piece. Tuesday nights, I'm going to do 5-6 weeks on journaling, how to listen to God. Maybe you want to tune into that. And don't get stuck in the forest and tree argument. Sometimes we can't see God for the trees. We're looking for God to do one thing, and he's here doing another. I mean, how could God have better got the church speaking to the social media generation than to force us online? Would we have ever done it on our own? What a wonderful story this is. When we're fearful, running away, when we're feeling lost without meaning, is when God is likely to walk up to us in the unlikely stranger and give us compassion, meaning, and show himself to us. What a wonderful